When we think of danger in prehistory, we imagine monster saber-toothed cats lurking in tall grass, massive bears crashing through trees, predators driven by instinct. But what if the most terrifying predator didn't crawl or roar? What if it stood upright, held a stone axe, and stared back at you with human eyes? Long before modern civilization, there lived a species not entirely unlike us Homo Heidelbergensis. They walked like us, thought like us. But in their world, survival wasn't earned by compassion. It was seized by force. In a landscape crawling with beasts, they were the ones to fear, not because they were mindless, but because they were calculating, coordinated, and willing to kill their own kind. The first shadow of humanity wore a human face. If you're watching this video on your television, don't forget to use your phone to subscribe to the channel before you keep watching. It's a small action, but a big motivation for us to keep bringing you more great content. They rose in an age of chaos. Glaciers blanketed the north, deserts scorched the south. Entire ecosystems vanished within a generation. Homo Heidelbergensis stepped into this unforgiving world not as victims but as survivors, shaped by hardship. Their bodies were built for endurance. Wide chests, powerful limbs, and thick bones hardened by struggle. Their minds? Sharp, focused, almost human. But it wasn't intelligence alone that kept them alive, it was resolve. While other species perished, they pushed forward. They mastered fire, crafted tools, and hunted as a unit. But cooperation didn't mean kindness. It meant strategy, cold, calculated, and often ruthless. In a world where resources vanished as fast as they were found, mercy could be fatal. To survive, they had to compete sometimes, even with their own. And in this crucible of extremes, they didn't merely endure nature's wrath, they became part of it. A force shaped by fire, sharpened by ice, and driven by the brutal logic of survival. This was not a world for the weak or the kind. Homo Heidelbergensis roamed a landscape teeming with lethal predator saber-toothed cats with blade-like fangs, cave lions twice the size of their modern cousins, hyenas the size of bears, and crocodiles so massive they could drag a grown adult beneath the surface in seconds. Every hunt was a gamble. Every journey beyond the cave mouth was a calculated risk. But despite these terrifying beasts, the greatest threat didn't come with claws or scales. It walked upright. It watched from the shadows. It waited for the right moment to strike another human. In a world already soaked in danger, Heidelbergensis learned that survival sometimes meant turning against their own. Whether over territory, food, or fear, the lines between kin and competitor blurred. This was the birthplace of calculated violence, not senseless rage but organized aggression. They didn't just survive nature's chaos, they added to it. They were both the hunted and the hunter. And sometimes, the enemy wore a familiar face. As archaeologists dug deeper into caves and forgotten valleys, they began to uncover bones not of animals, but of humans. These weren't ordinary remains. Many were scarred with distinct cut marks, some burned, others showing signs of repeated trauma. These weren't accidents of the wild or signs of natural decay. They were deliberate, intentional. Evidence pointed to something chilling. These individuals weren't just lost to time, they were targeted. Some had wounds in places that made no sense for ritual or defense. Cracks in skulls that suggest more than conflict, suggest control, strategy, and perhaps punishment. The idea that early humans may have hunted or harmed their own kind was once unthinkable. But now, the pattern was undeniable. In the harsh reality of prehistoric survival, Homo heidelbergensis may have become the first species to turn predation inward, to view fellow humans not only as allies, but as threats or even resources. They didn't just face danger, they became it. In the dry earth of Bodo, Ethiopia, archaeologists uncovered something that defied expectations: a human skull over 600,000 years old. But it wasn't the age that stunned them, it was the surface. Fine, deliberate cut marks covered key areas: the cheeks, the jawline, the sides of the neck. These weren't caused by animals, nor by environmental damage. They were the marks of toolstone, tools used with precision. Whoever made them wasn't hacking blindly. They were removing flesh carefully, systematically. And what's even more unsettling, no animal remains were found nearby. Only human bones, no signs of burial, no clear ritual offerings, just the unmistakable trace of human hands on human remains. Was it symbolic? A funerary practice lost to time? Or was it survival, driven by scarcity? Some scientists fear the truth may be darker still, that this wasn't reverence, but resource. In the silence of Bodo's soil, we hear a whisper from the past. When desperation strikes, even humanity has limits, and sometimes crosses them. Across Europe and Africa, ancient bones whisper a common story, one not of animals or accidents, but of people harming people. Archaeologists have uncovered skeletons marked by repeated trauma-blunt force to the skull, defensive wounds on arms, and patterns too consistent to be random. These weren't isolated acts of violence. They were systematic. Homo Heidelbergensis may have been the first to turn conflict into coordination, the first to organize groups not just to hunt, but to fight. But these weren't wars of belief or borders. They were primal struggles for access to water, hunting grounds, and survival itself. In a world where food was scarce and competition fierce, every resource became a battlefield. Mates were few. Shelter was limited. Power wasn't inherited. It was taken. Violence became negotiation. And those who could plan, ambush, and dominate didn't just survive, they shaped the next generation. War, as we know it, didn't begin with kings or empires. It began with survival, and with the hands of humans turned against their own. High in the Atapuerca Mountains of northern Spain lies a place cloaked in mystery and death. Known as Cima de los Huesos, or the Pit of Bones, it is one of the most haunting archaeological sites ever discovered. More than 7,000 human bone fragments were recovered from the bottom of a deep shaft, representing at least 28 individuals. But these weren't careful burials. There were no signs of ritual, no protective structures, no ceremonial objects, only broken bodies cast into the dark. One skull, famously labeled Cranium 17, bore 2 distinct blows to the forehead, deliberate, forceful, and fatal. This was no fault. It was a targeted act of violence. Someone made sure the victim never stood up again, and still more questions remain. Why this place? Why so many? Some believe it was an early form of body disposal. Others suggest something more grim, a site of execution, or even sacrifice. Whatever the truth, the pit does not lie. It preserves not only bones, but evidence of a mind capable of killing with purpose. Amid the shattered bones at the bottom of the Pit of Bones, something unexpected was found. Lying undisturbed beside the human remains was a single-hand axe crafted, not for battle, but with extraordinary care. Made of rare red quartz, a material difficult to shape and even harder to find, it stood out in both beauty and intention. Researchers called it Excalibur, not for its mythical power, but for the mystery it carried. It showed no signs of use, no wear from cutting or combat. It was not dropped in, haste it was placed. Deliberately, respectfully, or perhaps regretfully. Was it a symbol of mourning, a ritual gesture, a final token from killer to victim? The blade holds no answers, only questions. In a world where survival often meant brutality, this object suggests something deeper: emotion, memory, maybe even guilt. The same hands that could strike with force may also have understood the weight of loss. Homo Heidelbergensis may have been capable of terrible things, but perhaps also of meaning, however dark it may have been. The bones don't just tell us that violence occurred, they reveal how precise it was. Many human remains from the Paleolithic period show cut marks located specifically at muscle attachment points, places where flesh connects to bone. These weren't random scratches or the chaotic signs of desperation. They followed a pattern, a method. Skin, muscle, and fat were removed in a deliberate sequence, almost textbook in nature. Whoever did this knew exactly where to cut, how deep, and in what order. This wasn't instinct, it was anatomical understanding. It suggests planning, experience, and a purpose beyond survival alone. This kind of butchery isn't about rage, it's about utility, perhaps even ritual, and that's what makes it so chilling. The hands that wielded the stone tools weren't trembling, they were steady, focused. Homo Heidelbergensis didn't just learn to use tools, they learned to use each other. In a time when knowledge meant life or death, even the body became a resource to be studied, stripped, and used. Cold. Controlled. Human. From a nutritional standpoint, human flesh simply doesn't add up. Compared to massive prey like mammoths or bison, the energy yield is minimal. The risk? Tremendous. So why would Homo Heidelbergensis turn to their own kind? The answer likely lies beyond hunger. Some scientists believe these acts were symbolic tools of control rather than survival. To consume another human may have sent a message. This is what happens when you betray, when you lose, when you're no longer useful. It may have been punishment, a display of dominance, even vengeance. The body became more than just flesh, it became power, a resource for asserting fear and authority. In this context, cannibalism wasn't just practical. It was political, social, strategic. A warning carved into muscle and bone. And in such a brutal landscape, that warning may have mattered more than calories. It wasn't about feeding the stomach. It was about feeding control. Homo Heidelbergensis didn't just fight to survive, they mastered the art of intimidation through acts few dared imagine. In the arid soils of prehistoric Kenya, scientists unearthed a shocking find, a 1.45 million-year-old human tibia carved, not by nature, but by intention. Deep, clean-cut marks lined the bone, as if someone had stripped flesh with precision. There were no large animal bones nearby, no signs of scavengers or burial, and no indication that this was part of a broader feast. Just a single human leg, processed like meat. The implications are disturbing. If confirmed, this would be one of the earliest known examples of human cannibalism. But what makes it chilling is the context. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't a pack of predators closing in. It was a decision. Someone chose to do this. In a world where every day was a struggle to survive, the lines between hunter and hunted blurred. And, sometimes, they disappeared entirely. The attacker and the victim may have shared language, shelterer, even blood. In that moment, empathy vanished. What remained was a brutal logic: consume or be consumed. In this world, mercy was a luxury no one could afford. Homo Heidelbergensis wasn't just brutal, they were brilliant. In the region of Schöningen, Germany, researchers discovered wooden spears nearly 300,000 years old, meticulously crafted and perfectly balanced for long-distance throws. These weren't crude sticks. They were aerodynamic, durable, and deadly. A level of craftsmanship that required not only skill, but foresight and planning. Far to the south, in Ethiopia, stone-tipped projectiles dating back over 280,000 years revealed the same mastery. These weapons weren't improvised, they were engineered. Each one designed with specific purpose, combining natural materials with precision shaping. This was more than survival. It was strategy. These early humans understood not just how to kill, but how to do it efficiently. From distance, with force, with intent, they weren't merely reacting to danger, they were creating it. Their weapons allowed them to strike before being seen, to dominate before being challenged. Intelligence and violence fused into one terrifying capability. Homo Heidelbergensis didn't just use tools. They weaponized thought itself. Crafting a weapon is more than shaping a stick or sharpening a stone. It's about intention, thought, timing. Homo Heidelbergensis didn't just gather materials, they engineered tools from wood, stone, and bone in combinations that required foresight and patience. To make a spear that could fly straight, pierce thick hide, or endure repeated use wasn't instinct, it was innovation. And innovation demands something remarkable, the ability to imagine an outcome before it exists. These early humans weren't improvising. They were thinking ahead, refining techniques, and likely passing them down through teaching and imitation. This was the beginning of something far greater than survival. It was the emergence of culture. Each weapon reflected knowledge not held by one, but shared by many. And that knowledge, like the weapon itself, could be used for protection or domination. In their hands, a spear was more than a tool, it was a calculated extension of power, an idea made deadly. Homo Heidelbergensis didn't just react to their world, they reshaped it with thought sharpened into violence. In the heart of Tanzania, archaeologists uncovered bones more than 1.5 million years old, not just broken fragments, but carefully shaped tools. These weren't the results of chance. They were born from choice. Early humans like Homo Heidelbergensis didn't just grab the nearest rock, they selected specific materials, struck them with purpose, refined edges, and tested results. What emerged wasn't just a tool, it was a tradition. The skill was passed on, refined, taught, and remembered. In these acts, we see the roots of something deeper, culture. Not culture as we know it with art and stories, but a shared understanding of how to manipulate the world and each other. These tools help them butcher prey, build shelter, and, when needed, assert dominance. Intelligence, in their world, didn't lead to peace. It enhanced their ability to outthink rivals, to strike faster, and to survive longer. Homo Heidelbergensis built more than weapons. They built a systemon, where knowledge was power, and power was often wielded in blood. In a world built on survival, compassion should have been a weakness. And yet, buried deep within the pit of bones in Ethiopia, archaeologists found a surprising clue. Among the remains was a skeleton of an individual with a severe pelvic deformity and injury so debilitating they would have been unable to walk unaided, let alone hunt or defend themselves. And yet, they lived for years. Someone shared food with them, protected them, carried them. In a species known for its raw brutality, this moment stands out like a flicker of warmth in the cold. It wasn't biology that kept this person alive. It was community, connection, empathy. Perhaps for the first time, survival wasn't just about strength, it was about care. But even here, the shadow of brutality lingered. Because in this early form of community, protection could be offered or withdrawn. Kindness had limits. Support had conditions. In the hands of Homo Heidelbergensis, even mercy was a strategic choice. And in that, they took their first step toward becoming us. Long before cities, nations, or written language, Homo Heidelbergensis began to build something remarkable: society. They lived in small groups of 15 to 30 individuals, bound by blood, survival, and necessity. They hunted together, divided labor, and likely exchanged mates across groups to strengthen their lineage. But this wasn't random wandering. Archaeological sites in places like Boxgrove, England, and Schöningen, Germany, show evidence of repeated visits, proof of planning, memory, and perhaps even purpose. These may have been ancient gathering spots, places to share tools, trade resources, or pass down knowledge. Maybe, on cold nights, they even told stories beside flickering flames. But this early society wasn't peaceful. It was practical. Bonds were strong because the outside world was cruel. Protection came with loyalty. Trust was valuable, but fragile. In this world, inclusion meant survival, and exile meant death. Homo Heidelbergensis may have birthed the first community, but they also forged the earliest lines between us and them. And that division would shape the future of our species. Even in the earliest human communities, peace was never guaranteed. Trust had limits, tensions brewed, and sometimes consequences followed. One of the most telling discoveries is Skull 17 from Atapuerca, human cranium bearing two nearly identical fractures to the forehead. Not random, not accidental, not the result of a predator's claw or a fatal fall. These wounds were deliberate, forceful, and delivered with precision. The evidence points to human hands, but the motive? That's the mystery. Was this an act of revenge, a punishment for betrayal, or something even more profound, a form of primitive justice? The existence of such violence suggests more than chaos. It suggests rules, expectations, and when those rules were broken, retribution followed. In a society just beginning to take shape, these moments may have marked the first attempts at social order. Not through written law, but through action, through fear, through consequences. Homo Heidelbergensis may have wielded not only tools and weapons, but judgment, and in doing so, they blurred the line between justice and vengeance. As populations grew and the climate shifted, scarcity became a constant. Rivers dried, herds migrated, safe shelters vanished. What remained wasn't shared, it was fought over. Groups of Homo Heidelbergensis began to clash, not out of rage or misunderstanding, but out of necessity. Access to water, control over hunting grounds, and dominance of fertile valleys became matters of life and death. This wasn't random brutality, it was calculated, repeated, territorial. The same intelligence that built tools was now used to secure borders. Ambushes were planned. Encounters weren't avoided, they were expected. The violence was no longer reactionary, it was tactical. Early warfare wasn't led by kings or driven by ideologies. It began in the mud and stone of the Paleolithic world, where a bend in the river or a cave mouth could determine a clan's fate. To defend was survival. To expand was power, and to strike first was often the only option. In the world of Homo Heidelbergensis, peace was not the default. War was not the failure. War was the system. We may never hear their voices, but their bones speak volumes. The structure of Homo Heidelbergensis' vocal tract, combined with the size and complexity of their brains, suggests they were capable of more than grunts or instinctive cries. They may have spoken. Maybe not in full sentences like us, but in meaningful sound signals, warnings, instructions, perhaps even stories passed around firelight, and speech changes everything. If they communicated, they could teach. If they taught, they remembered. And memory, more than muscle, defines humanity. With language comes abstraction planning, deception, persuasion. It allows for unity and division. It builds alliances and justifies violence. Imagine a leader rallying a hunting group, or Worsi clan convincing itself that another group deserved no mercy. Words could bring people together or turn them into weapons. If Homo Heidelbergensis spoke, then their brutality wasn't just instinct. It was shaped by thought, sharpened by reason, and perhaps amplified by belief. The first spoken words may not have been greetings, they may have been commands. Homo Heidelbergensis wasn't just another branch of the evolutionary tree, they were the hinge, the turning point between animal instinct and conscious intent. They hunted with tools, but they also remembered the hunt. They cared for their injured, but they killed with purpose. They formed bonds, but they broke them with violence. In their world, love and betrayal, creation and destruction, empathy and cruelty all coexisted in brutal harmony. And when they disappeared, it wasn't because they failed. It was because they gave rise to something more. Some of them became Neanderthals, others Denisovans, and some became us. And in us, they remain. In our endurance, in our fire for survival, in our capacity to build cities, speak poetry, and dream of stars, but also in our rage, our fear, our ability to hurt, to dominate, to justify cruelty with logic, and conflict with purpose. The blood of Homo Heidelbergensis flows quietly beneath the skin of modern humanity. Their brilliance shaped the path ahead. Their darkness still echoes in our shadow. We study them to understand what we were, but what we often find is a mirror, one that reflects not monsters of myth, but monsters that wore familiar faces. Ours. This is more than history. This is our origin story, raw, brutal, human. If their bones could talk, they would whisper the truth we fear the most. The first monsters that hunted humans were humans. Subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows for more chilling journeys into the blood-stained corners of our past.